Everlasting India takes pride in bringing you stories of courage, resilience, and vision. Among the countless heroes of our land, one name shines with unique brilliance: V.O. Chidambaram Pillai, or simply V.O.Sh. He was no warrior with sword or shield. Instead, he fought the empire with ships, daring to challenge the British monopoly over the seas. Born in Ottapidaram in 1872, V.O.Sh. became a fiery lawyer, a man of words and action. But beyond law courts and arguments, his dream was bigger: to see Indians stand as equals before the British, even on the ocean waves. His people called him the Kappalottiya Tamizhan, the Tamil who sailed ships. His story is not just about ships or trade. It is about dignity, self-reliance, and the courage to dream the impossible. This is his journey, from humble beginnings to eternal legacy. In the flickering glow of an oil lamp, young Chidambaram sat reading Tamil classics late into the night. He devoured works of ancient poets, tales of courage, and stories of rulers who stood tall against oppression. His father, a respected scholar, ensured the boy grew up with discipline and knowledge. But V.O.Sh.'s inspiration came not just from books. He listened to villagers speak about injustice under British rule, about the humiliation of Indians treated as second-class citizens in their own land. Every story struck him deeply. Even as a child, he asked, why should we bow? Why should we obey blindly? In those quiet nights, his heart absorbed ideals of freedom. The seeds of rebellion were being sown, not through anger, but through wisdom. Little did anyone know, the boy lost in books would one day become the man who sailed against the empire. The bustling port of Tuticorin was a picture of colonial dominance. Towering British steamers filled the harbour, their flags fluttering like reminders of foreign power. Indian merchants watched helplessly as their goods were taxed unfairly, their trade stifled, their dignity trampled. The British India Steam Navigation Company controlled every voyage. Fares were exorbitant, Indians were treated with disdain, and no competitor dared to challenge them. To most, this monopoly seemed unshakable. But among the crowd stood one man who refused to bow: V.O.C. He watched the injustice with eyes that burned with resolve. In his mind, a vision began to take shape. If the seas belong to everyone, why should only the British rule them? Why not us? At Tuticorin port, where despair hung heavy, a seed of defiance was ready to bloom. A man was preparing to challenge an empire's pride on its own waters. As V.O.Sh. established himself as a lawyer, he also became a voice for the common man. In crowded halls and dusty markets, he spoke with fire: why should we depend on foreign ships? Why not sail our own? His words electrified merchants and workers alike. For them, trade was livelihood. For him, it was dignity. Law books in one hand, dreams in the other, he began convincing people that a new path was possible. He explained that if Indians pooled their resources, they could build a company strong enough to stand against the British. The idea was bold, dangerous, even foolish to some. But to V.O.Sh., it was inevitable. His dream was not about profit but pride. When he declared, "We shall launch our own ships," the air itself seemed to vibrate with hope. A quiet town was about to witness the birth of something revolutionary. In 1906, after relentless effort, the impossible happened. The Swadeshi Steam Navigation Company was born. Investors from every corner, farmers, traders, and patriots, contributed money not for profit but for pride. The day the first ship was launched, the atmosphere at Tuticorin port was electric. With a resounding crack of a coconut against its hull, the steamer touched water. Crowds erupted in chants of Vande Mataram. V.O.Sh stood tall, his eyes gleaming. For the first time, an Indian company had dared to challenge the mighty British on the seas. His ships were more than vessels. They were floating symbols of self-respect. Every sail was a statement, every wave a challenge. In that moment, Tuticorin was no longer just a port. It became a battlefield not of guns and swords, but of willpower, courage, and the dream of freedom. The steamers SS Gallia and S.S. Lawoe set out on their historic voyage from Tuticorin to Colombo. On board were ordinary Indians, men, women, and children traveling with heads held high. No British officer ordered them around, no insults were thrown, no dignity was denied. As the ships cut proudly across the waves, the Indian tricolor fluttered in the salty air. On the shore, thousands gathered to cheer, their voices rising above the roar of the ocean. For once, the seas did not belong to the empire. They belonged to India, to its people, to a dream that had taken shape in the heart of one fearless lawyer. The voyage was more than a journey, it was a statement to the world. A nation under chains had dared to sail free. The waves of the Indian Ocean carried not just ships, but hope itself. The British were alarmed. Never before had their monopoly been challenged so boldly. To destroy Swadeshi, they cut fares to nearly nothing, offering tickets at a loss. Merchants who supported V.O.Sh were threatened. Passengers were harassed, trade routes blocked, and conspiracies hatched. Every trick of empire was unleashed. For most men, this would have been the end. But V.O.Sh stood firm. He reminded his people, this is not business. This is battle. It is not about profit, it is about dignity. His words inspired loyalty. Families continued to support him, even when they suffered losses. Each voyage of Swadeshi ships became a symbol of resistance. Each ticket purchased was an act of rebellion. For V.O.Sh, the struggle was never about money, it was about pride. In the face of an empire's fury, he proved that a determined people could hold their ground. In 1908, V.O.Sh's defiance reached its peak. Alongside his ally Subramania Siva, he organized protests against the British. The empire struck back. V.O.Sh was arrested, dragged in chains before a colonial court. Crowds gathered outside, furious at the injustice. Inside the courtroom, the judge thundered with accusations, calling him a traitor. But V.O.Sh stood calm, his face unshaken. His voice was steady as he declared his loyalty not to the crown, but to his motherland. The verdict was brutal, 2 life sentences, 40 years in prison. The man who had sailed ships of freedom was condemned as a criminal. Outside, the people cried in rage and sorrow, but in V.O.Sh's heart, there was no regret. He had stood up to the empire. Even in chains, he had preserved his dignity. For the British, it was a victory. For India, it was the making of a martyr. In Coimbatore Central Jail, V.O.Sh faced his darkest humiliation. Once a commander of ships, he was now forced to pull the oil press like a bullock. Under the scorching sun, with iron chains around his body, he dragged the heavy stone mill that crushed seeds into oil. His hands bled, his body weakened, but his spirit remained unbroken. Guards mocked him, hoping to break his will. But when asked if he regretted his defiance, V.O.Sh replied with fire, "I would rather live in chains for my country than sail free under a foreign flag." His suffering shook the hearts of people across Tamil Nadu. Stories of his punishment spread like wildfire, inspiring thousands to join the freedom struggle. In that all-press, Vyoshi was not just crushed in body, he was forged into a symbol of resistance. His pain became his people's strength. Years later, Vyoshi was released, broken in health and stripped of wealth. The British had destroyed his company, taken his fortune, and left him in poverty. Yet he did not retreat into silence. Children still gathered around him, listening with wide eyes as he spoke of freedom. He no longer commanded ships, but he commanded hearts. His stories carried lessons of courage, sacrifice, and pride. Though he lived his final years in hardship, he gave his people something priceless: belief in themselves. He showed them that even when defeated materially, the spirit of resistance could never be taken away. In humble homes and crowded streets, his words continued to plant seeds of freedom in young minds. Though the empire tried to erase him, they failed. His voice lived on, carried in the whispers of children and the chants of protesters alike. Scene 10, Eternal Legacy. Today, at Tuticorin port, Indian ships sail freely under the tricolor flag. Every horn that sounds, every wave that breaks, is a reminder of a man who dared to dream when no one else would. V.O. Chidambaram Pillai, the Kappalottiya Tamizhan, lives on in the spirit of this land. Statues stand in his honor, books retell his story, and generations recall his sacrifice. His courage is etched into the soul of Tamil Nadu and India. More than a century later, his lesson remains timeless: freedom is not given, it is taken. It begins not with violence, but with courage to defy. Vyoshi showed that even without weapons, one could fight an empire with conviction, organization, and willpower. His name sails across history like his ships once did, cutting through storms, fearless and proud. He remains an eternal beacon of self-reliance and dignity.